Hi everyone, I'm very excited to have with me today some of the creative team behind Ubin. So we have the co-directors Kok Heng Leun and Koh Hui Ling, as well as anGie, who is working on the sound installation for Ubin. So I'm just going to jump into it because Ubin is such a hefty project, right? And in many ways, when I looked at the performance score for Ubin, something that struck me was how it seems to be such a natural and logical progression of the many threads around sight, memory, that Drama Box has been working on over the past few years, or even I would say in past 1 to 2 decades, right? And I was so curious, was working with the stories of Pulau Ubin something that you were interested in before Natalie approached you, or did it emerge through conversations with Natalie? Like how did Ubin start?
I do think it's a little bit different, but I will start off with my end first, of course. So from my side, it's mainly really Natalie's invitation. So I think the invitation to Drama Box to ask us what was that, if there is an offering from Drama Box to sifa, then what would it be? And so then we had a discussion, actually also with Xue Mei. Yeah, so we're discussing like, you know what show should we put on, and then we decided based on the angling of the show, and then I think you picked it up really quickly about the strands that we have been working on, and then so the two of us started discussion about if there is a site that we want to choose to do for Ubin, or is there any site that we had been involved in recently that we think can actually take it to the next level in terms of hearing and revisiting some of the stories there, then what would it be? And actually then that's when Ubin came up. So maybe you talk about your involvement in Ubin first, and then how that was brought in.
So I think it comes in a number of levels. I mean, personally, I've been thinking about Ubin for quite some time. Think in early 90s, when I was already, we did some things there together with, I did some things there with Kipin. That time is still Theatre Ox, at Ubin. Then over the last few years, there have been quite a lot of things happening in Ubin. And because I'm also an EXCO member of Singapore Heritage Society, so I have privy to some of the issues that are happening in Ubin. And I also remember that Chek Jawa was actually a very important incident. As a site, not only for what it is now, as a pristine site of conservation, but how Chek Jawa was being conserved was an important part of the civil society history. I think Chek Jawa opened up this new page whereby how when people are mobilized, when the civil societies are being activated, and then there is a kind of support to try to conserve something so pristine. So in the end, the government responded. So I think Ubin is really a very unique site in that. And so because of some of the recent things that they are also facing, it became a natural site for us to think about. And that's where I shared with Hui Ling and talk about, can we do something there for the festival? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I love how Drama Box always has a very keen sense of what is happening across the different sides of Singapore, and then sometimes it feels like when there's a good opportunity, or when it feels like the moment is right, that there's a certain conversation that needs to happen in that particular site, then Drama Box does kind of activate to talk about it, right? I'm thinking about the Dakota Crescent production. And apart from thinking about it thematically, I think the second thing that came up for me from looking at the performance score was also how, in terms of its form, it does also feel like a culmination of different vocabularies that you've been playing with, right? There's a kind of verbatim text that accompanies a more story or narrative kind of, a narrator kind of role. there is also a very strong workshop conversation component. Were these decisions to include these elements a very conscious one, or did it feel like just a very natural progression, again, from what you've already been working on and exploring? Maybe Heng Leun?
I think when we first started, there were many other things that we were trying. We wanted to even, bring audience deeper into Ubin, working with residents if possible. But because of COVID, because of resources, so we have to sort of scale down what we wanted to do. But the idea of engaging is important, and that's why the conversation bit has been something quite important. And in fact, I think like in the beginning we knew that there will be a part that is more interactive. Then the other part is actually how to actually bring the audience into the interaction, because it's so easy to say let's do interaction, right? But you actually need to tell and scaffold the entire experience. So then the experiential part then has to be thought through. So it slowly evolves, and again, of course, even though some things seem similar like verbatim, but this time the verbatim is slightly different, whereby last time the verbatim were finally performed by actors, but this time actually we are using the voice, the real voice of the residents, past and present, weave into a kind of a podcast. So the experience is actually very sound-based this time. I would say that this time sound played such an important part, because when audience goes to Ubin in the evening, the number of things that you can see becomes lesser. The obvious things, right? Because you don't have the sunlight, right? And it's getting dark, and Ubin is not very bright. So actually then what becomes the most prominent thing over there? And that would be the sound. And that's why we are actually working with a lot of sound elements in this case, text, sound of the area, and of course sound installation and other sound designs that comes into it. So that you sort of open the senses of audience, so that then when they come to the part whereby there's an interaction, then the scaffolding process would have provided them a kind of a buy-in, to do that kind of interaction.
I think also because interestingly, although we're both from the same company, right? But actually over the years we have also been working on our own projects, right? So in a way, I would say that this is one of the few times, not few, like actually recent times that we come together and do on one project together. So I think that for me, we don't talk about it because we take it for granted, like we are in the same company, right? But I think just now as you were asking that, then suddenly this thought came to mind. Actually we don't really work with each other on a similar project where our separate practice, how can it or would it come together? I think that would be quite interesting to explore, I guess, for myself. And then I think the other thing is also in terms of practice wise, I think site-specific itself has always been something I'm very intrigued by. Like going to found spaces and be using all the elements, including the human stories, right? But everything else, including the site, the sound, architecture of that space, and then building a narrative around it or an experience around it. So I think for Ubin, it's also similar in that sense, as in continuing that strand and that train of thought. What I thought was probably one step, or rather adding on, accumulated from the past few experiences, because I remember very vividly our dear friend Corey. So for I think Dakota, she came and then she wrote a review about it, and then at the end she asked, or was it the lesson, I can't remember, but it should be Dakota, that she wrote a question, I guess, about now that we do all know about these things, and then now that we are shown the stories and the challenges and the obstacles, actually what happens next, what do we do next? Yeah, so actually that question stayed with me till now. Obviously I can still remember it, and I think because as what we do in Drama Box, I think we also always question what is the role of theatre or the arts in a larger context, I think a civic space. Yeah, so then I think the challenge I gave myself this time, which was slightly different from what I had been used to do. So like in the past, probably I'll be spending a lot of time going down, creating different workshops with the participants and taking the materials and then leading that to the final piece. But this time around, when we were talking about the content, I think we kind of broke it up into a few parts. And I think one is really looking at what Ubin was, what Ubin is, and then actually what can Ubin become. Yeah. So I think when we go into the becoming, to me, then I'm again reminded of Corey's question, right? And then I'll start asking myself like, okay, so what can we do? What is needed for the audience? Because naturally they will be outsiders, right? That non-residents of Ubin. Yeah. So how do we enter this conversation? And then because like I was talking about it, that in like the lesson, because there were two demarcations also, like the public and the residents, right? And then there will be the public members, right, who was playing that role, will say, actually we are the public. I don't stay there. How can I, vote and make an impact on that? Yeah. So I think all these were the vignettes from the past, right, that I remember. And then when creating the experience this time round, especially the futuring part, I questions that I also ask myself, like, actually how do they enter the conversation, at which level, how? I think that pitching is what needs to be said. And then I think the other thing is really to focus on the futuring aspect, which is, actually what can we do? Yeah. So I think, so this time around, I guess for me, the taking a leaf from what we had before, but actually building it onto this part where I find it quite interesting to focus on actually this idea of futuring. Yeah. And then what is this future we want to build? I mean, when we did the interviews and all that, we do hear some of the residents giving some imaginations of, I think how Ubin can become like that. So whether we take what they suggest as the basis to expound from, or actually do we open it up a little bit more in terms of, actually if we're all denizens of Singapore, then what is this future we want to see? So it is a more macro kind of question. So I think now is that stage of fine-tuning that. But I think that in a way grew from what we had before and to where what I'm looking at now.
I can see him not has a thought.
I'm just thinking about this idea of futuring. Actually, in a lot of theatre artwork, right, the work talks about the past. Usually you write memories, you write about the past, something that had happened before. Science fiction work is most difficult in theatre, where you have to set the context of future. Strangely, or now that I'm reflecting on Drama Box work, actually starting from IPS Prism, where we already were looking a lot into the future. So IPS Prism was about how many years? 20 years? Or 10 years? 10 years into the future. We're looking into future governance, future politicians, future citizenship. In both sides now, we're actually asking people to talk about their future and not talk about now. Besides talking about now, but what is it that you should be doing or preparing so that, your end of life process is something of dignity. So in this particular case, or even the lesson was actually a practice of how to deal with future, to this piece of actually looking at future. So art can become a kind of a proposition, a kind of a playground for you to actually imagine and try things out safely. Sometimes can be dangerously, sometimes can be brutally, to really look at what future could be.
I think what I'm hearing from your answers and also thinking about Drama Box's work, it feels like time travel actually is a certain thematic in the way you approach your works, looking at the history, looking at past stories, but also then thinking about what it means to be imagining now in the present as to what the future could be as a way of actively futuring, right? Building towards the worlds that we want to see. And in that kind of time travel journey, there's also a sense of the communities and networks that you're building slowly along the way. And you know, anGie, I know that you have been working with Drama Box for a number of productions before this. From your first encounter with Drama Box to your current experience with Ubin, how has that journey been like? How do you feel like, you know, your practice and what Drama Box is doing?
I love working with Drama Box because I think it's important what they do for Singapore. And I think art plays a very important role in society, you know. And I feel like Drama Box actually serves as a bridge, bringing art closer to people and even showcasing the people. I think the human spirit element is very important. Even for Ubin production, I'm drawn into this element a lot, you know. Beside it being a ritual piece, sound being ritual, I think using the kind of very empathetic approach in creating works, I think is something that I always agree on. You know, experiencing like the site, the space, the colors, you know, the people. I think, and how I'm able to use that to extract the sound that I feel that is resonate with the context of the work, you know.
I mean, I think in your practice as well, you talk about the enigma of life, right?
Yes.
So I'm curious, how then did you approach the actual sound installation that you were working on for Ubin? Could you, you know, share a little bit more about the specific kind of sound installation that you're working on? Because I understand it's one part of like a much bigger kind of soundscape or sound works, right?
Sound for me, I think is I always tap on sound to create a kind of atmosphere, inject emotions, you know. And I feel there's this tree that we saw together with Heng Leun and Hui Ling. Is like, I say, oh wow, it would be nice to have sound around the tree or in the tree, you know, as if the tree makes the sound. I would think of that, and I felt there's this kind of mystical energy within that, and how am I supposed to express that in a tree that's so majestic and so like, wow, you know, like, it's a challenge, but I think at the moment my process is always ongoing, is fluid, but as I go and how I create sound, so I'm doing recording at home, right? And I play the instruments, I use vocals, and try to add in a lot of sounds that I collected in Ubin, and then from there it kind of becomes my palette, you know, and that's how I create my composition. Yeah, I mean the methodology is quite similar to how I do my visual works, but for me it's challenging this time because I'm dealing with actual sight, you know, as in in Ubin itself, you know. And people are supposed to experience the sound as they walk. And what do I want them to feel when they listen? So these are some of these considerations that I have in mind while I'm making the soundtracks.
Yeah, I really love this sense of the sound creating a certain atmosphere that people are being invited to go on a journey as they literally walk through Ubin as well. What were some of the communications, you know, between the co-directors and you in terms of shaping the sound work or shaping the sound installation?
I work a lot I work closely with Heng Leun. So we always bounce ideas, you know. And I just think because we have worked before, we created a kind of very nice synergy, I think. Like how, like, you know, oh, I don't have to explain so much. Oh, you get it, right? I say, yeah. you know, that is the magic, you know, to have, to actually develop such a synergy. I mean, synergy with people, or even like a hunch, you know, like, hey, I think you'll work. Yeah, why? I don't know, but I know you'll work. You know, this is the magic of art making, I think. Yeah.
And of trust, right? The trust that comes from having spent a lot of time together, and a lot of the time being spent listening and being in relation to each other. And this makes me think about the kind of stakeholder partner relationships that are often very evident in Drama Box's work. And in this piece, you know, there's both Singapore Heritage Society that's mentioned, as well as Nature Society, which I think they did a kind of biodiversity impact assessment, and of course, and parks, as well as the Friends of Ubin. Could you talk a little bit more about the relationship that you were working on with these different stakeholders?
So maybe I'll talk about Heritage Society first. I think partly his involvement in SHS and then hence into Ubin, I think that was the natural way in which SHS came onto this Ubin project. But actually we do have a very long history working with SHS on many different projects. So they actually, in terms of, I mean, personally, I've learned a lot about civic action and the civic society as well, with the civil society actually, and the approaches and across the different sectors from them actually, yeah, because of the richness of their members and also the depth of their research. SHS will always be our research partner. So as in, so in a way, it was two things that came together, you know, like them already being somebody we really agree with, a bit like what anGie was talking about, the synergy was there. And then the other thing was also his involvement in SHS, yeah. So then that's when we approached them immediately as to see if they could come on board, also as a research partner, and also the network, because they actually have a project that they are have been working on the island.
So there's a subgroup in there's a group in Ubin called the Kawan Ubin, whom SHS is also directly involved with. Yeah, and they have been going around helping residents and trying to actually, I would say in a different way, a kind of anthropological kind of a study of what Ubin is like.
Yeah, so there were a lot of, so they actually had a photo voice process as well, which is something that SHS actually had been doing. So my project in Chinatown, they were also doing photo voice in Chinatown. Yeah, so the researcher for photo voice is Natalie. So she, another Natalie. And then so she and her students and the interns of SHS, who are always very good, then they had been going around, and then actually because of the pandemic, then it had to become a Zoom session with past residents as well as interested, I would say, the future generations of the citizens of Ubin, right? So they all come together, and then they start bring out photographs of how life was like and things like that. And then as Natalie's team will document everything down into this massive work. So like currently her team is also working on collecting stories from very specific people, you know, something like the Humans of New York kind of way. But yeah, so that day we were having a meeting, they were like, oh yeah, they'll just have Humans of Ubin. Yeah, so then we have been thinking also then how to incorporate, so on top of what we originally planned with each other and then with anGie, right, and then the designers, then when we talk to the stakeholders, we'll see how to incorporate maybe some of the materials that they have. Because actually on the last 2 days of our performance is when Pesta Ubin is going to happen. Yeah, so it's going to be then from 4th of June onwards till the end of the month, that every weekend there will be activities happening, which is something that had already been ongoing for the past few years, and they stopped, of course, because of the pandemic. Yeah, so we were seeing how we can tie this entire thing together so that it, you know, they can do their presentation exhibition kind of thing as part of ours, and then they can continue on and keeping it there as part of Pesta Ubin. Yeah, so like for example, our show will probably be part of Pesta Ubin's offering as well. Yeah, so we're discussing that part of how because of what is already happening on the ground, and actually 1 + 1 equals to more than 3 lah. Yeah, I think that's what we have been trying to do with the stakeholders, and seeing how now really to bring the materials into and incorporate it into our show.
And I think SHS and Pulau Ubin are going to stay there, continue to work there.
Yep.
So I think our work, what we're doing is actually to be partnering them so that they can continue even after we finish the work, and they continue the conversations with the people of Ubin about the future of Ubin. Yeah. So I think so the idea here is then for us not to create a work in silo, but to create a work with various people, with artists who are deeply connected with people, with NGOs who are deeply connected with the place, with memories. And in this particular case, the other group that we're working with is Nature Society. This is not the first time we work with Nature Society. The first time was Bukit Brown, when we interviewed Hua Chiu, the Nature Society people, about the story of Bukit Brown. But this time it came in really because I think the Parks Board were concerned about our performance happening at the quarry area, affecting the birds there, because the birds seems to be roosting there, or what they call as resting there. Okay, the technical term is roosting. Okay, that's what we learned. Then the herons will be there. So they asked us to do an biodiversity impact assessment, and I think this is actually very, very interesting because, to be honest, for us who do a lot of site-specific work, one reality is that no matter what we do, there's always an impact there. There's always an impact on the people, sometimes good, sometimes negative. There will be impact on the environment, impact on communal relationship. But in this particular case, because we are in Ubin, we are going to leave some footprints there. We are going to affect the environment there. And then in this particular case, we're really talking about the nature, right? The birds. So in this particular place where the herons will be there, there are different kinds of biodiversity, ecosystem there. So what happened here is that Parks Board actually wanted us to do a biodiversity assessment, impact assessment. And I suspect we are probably the first theatre company in Singapore doing that, which I think is really great because it makes us so aware that what you do is no longer about just your own personal vanity and you want to do this to get there, but you actually start to understand why you're doing this and how you have impact other things. The idea is also not to make life difficult for us. I think the idea is really to think about if there is an impact, how do we mitigate this impact? What are the things that we need to put in order to ensure that while we are creating positive outcomes, at the same time we also take care of any kind of remnants kind of effects that will have on the environment. So in this particular case, how do we look at sound being used there? How do we look at lights being used there? And I think that's where then the aesthetic of this piece came in already. It really greatly informed us on the aesthetic. So do we make up the whole place, such that it's very cosmetic? Do we bring in lights? Do we bring in sound? Can we bring in huge generator? Then if we want to look at the impact that you have on this thing, we'll probably say no, right? So, and what is that beauty of Ubin? So in the end, if you audience coming to this piece, they will actually see that it's actually a very there's a lot of effort to make it minimal. But in order to maximize what are the richness of Ubin, so that makes us all of us really had to spend time listening to the richness of Ubin, seeing the richness of Ubin even in little lights. So I've seen how she has to borrow through different places, try to pick up different kind of sounds and there with Joel, the sound engineer. So we had to visit from place to place in order to listen to the various sound and the different voices there. So that what we are doing are not keep piling things onto Ubin, but actually reveal what has been concealed or show what is concealing it.
Or amplification.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even as there's a very rich conscious or very sensitive consciousness of the ecosystem that you are, working with in the material site itself of Ubin as an island, there's also very sensitive attention paid to the nurturing the relationships over the years, right? And I'm curious to think about the ecosystem of the artistic team or the creative team for Ubin, anGie as one part of the very big team for Ubin. What were some of, your excitements or challenges in negotiating your work with the other sound engineer or other sound artists?
I think it's exciting for me to review things, like in terms of an idea, like you are supposed to kind of peel off the layers and then what is left behind. For me, I feel the process that I'm working for, the creative process for Ubin is like that. You cannot use so much. That's my limitation. You have to use what you have there. So that's your palette. And I think it makes me feel a bit less like selfless. I cannot put too much of me inside. I have to think a lot about a lot of other stuff like the people, the sound, a small little sound, a crack, the tree, maybe the branches break, all this and the wind, the sea breeze, the waves. The breeze and the waves is different sound, you know what I mean? So it's very micro. Like I have to go into so much detail, but yet not to use so much to cover it, So the certain rawness of the sound that you feel is a certain kind of honesty too, So how I work with others is I think we all come together quite well, Everybody is just like trying to visualize or even visualizing the sound too, So yeah, I mean we are constantly in conversation, so my hunch it will be okay.
I think it will be more than okay. I mean, it sounds so rich and evocative, right? And this idea of really what do we need and how do we turn our attention to what is really present there. And the moment you turn your attention to what is present, actually there's so much, right? Like you're talking about like the distinctions between even the breeze and the sea breeze, like that's a different texture. And I imagine that the breeze in the morning is also very different from an evening breeze. And how do you, really play with and yet also respect the kind of nuance of these different things that already exist.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, there's also this anticlimax. You always need a little bit of the contrast to bring out what you have already as a creative method for me, I mean, personally. So I think if I have something quite sounding natural, I need something very industrial, maybe. For instance, a generator, so that it could actually make people listen to the nature. So yeah, I think it's how the sound arrangement can be very refreshing for me, like in terms of in order to know how things can be so white, you need the darkness to have that paradox, that contrast. I think this production, I mean this work, being involved in this work allows me to see things in this way too.
Yeah, thanks for that. I love the important reminder of what it means to juxtapose things, that if you're going to talk about the future we need to talk about the past, or if we talk about the past, we also need to talk about the future, right? The two need to coexist together in order to really have that rich and very textured kind of discourse. And maybe as a way of slowly wrapping up this conversation, I hear in the way you're approaching the sound, in a way, a very ritualistic approach. And if I think about Ubin, the production has so many aspects of ritual within it. It feels like there's a certain ritual of arriving, there's a certain ritual of encountering, of leaving. And also then Ubin in itself feels like a huge ritual, right? And I was just curious if each of you could offer, one word or one phrase as to what this ritual of Ubin is or is for. And maybe anGie, would you like to start first?
Only one word, right?
I mean, or a phrase.
A phrase. Essence is honesty.
Essence is honesty. Do you want to elaborate, or less is more? Essence is honesty.
Yeah, less is more. Less is more is good. That's so Muji.
Product placement.
Yeah, less is more. Yeah, but it's also, peeling off and what is the core? Shine that core, I think nowadays a lot of fabrication. Anything you could be fabricated, but I think removing all these layers is very important. And what is exactly there? Yeah, and that's actually a lot. It's very powerful. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Maybe Hui Ling?
For me, I've come to, sometimes actually these kinds of conversations are very useful for me, because then because when you do the work, then you just focus on the work, right? So I think something that I took away from today, because we had an earlier conversation also, I think is the idea of being, B-E-I-N-G. So being in terms of, I think in this day and age, we are there, but I think the questioning the idea of presence, right? You know how even when we're in front of the computer, you have so many tabs open. They can have a meeting with you. I'm on Zoom, then I have a WhatsApp tab open. So I think the idea of going to Ubin and when we talk about the minimalizing of things to amplify what is already around, I think is that state of really going back to what it means to be with a person, to be with the space, to be with yourself, right? The whole idea of actually on me alone, without all of you, I do feel, hear, sense, smell, right? But I think many times maybe when we are so stimulated by so many things around us that we forget. Yeah. So for example, when I go to Ubin, let's say for example, if I hear a generator sound, maybe we are quite used to a motor running, right? But actually to have a generator sound in Ubin itself is quite a thing, right? Because it's an island and actually it has no electricity, etc. Yeah. So to actually have that, to be conscious, because you are there and be with the thing and being conscious of that relationship, right? Of the other. Yeah, I think that to me then is the whole idea of the being, that conversation actually with yourself, the person next to you, and the larger environment that is there lah. Yeah, so that we don't just keep thinking about what is this artwork we want to do, what is it that we want to achieve at the end of the day. Yeah, but actually it's literally I feel that we are kind of like the conduits. We just allow, or rather we seek and gotten permission to allow everybody else to come there and be part of the space. Yeah, and being there. Yeah. So I think that's me. Your turn?
Yeah. I think I vacillate days and days as you go, as I visit a place here. I think maybe this few weeks, this 1 week, the main thought in my mind is always this thing between tenderness and brutality. I think we tend to want to romanticize a place like nature or even Ubin, kampong, beautiful, whatever. In nature, we always think that it heals. But within nature, there's actually also a lot of brutalities, right? There's life and death every day within nature. Remember that day when we were at doing our biodiversity assessment, and we were using our binoculars and we'll look, and then someone said, hey, there's an eagle. I think it's a white belly sea eagle there, up there. And then the NSS people eyes are so sharp, right? Then they look and they say, I think the eagle is eating something. So suddenly in that very beautiful picture, there's an eagle actually, eating probably something that she has caught. In that moment, there's life. But in the moment, there is death. Living in Ubin is not an easy feat. We keep saying that, oh, it's so nice to be there, it's so nice to be there. But for the people living there, it is always this challenge between tenderness and brutality. So yesterday I was there, I was caught in the rain, and this uncle was sitting there, he was selling drinks, and then after that he sat there, and there was this really very nice moment, Then he was like, he was just chilling there, and I was also chilling there, like, okay, waiting for rain. But before the rain finishes, he has to move on, right? So he has to ride under the rain in his motorcycle, and then it's very slippery. It is a very different kind of life, and it's something that we need to balance. And I really think that, we're working with nature and we're part of nature. And in her word, too much of our anthropocenic kind of existence that now we probably have to be able to deal with this. That we have to learn to deal with this tenderness as well as this kind of brutality of existence, that we are not the center of everything.
Wow, that was such a poetic meditation, and it also makes me think of some of the stories that came out of the Dakota Crescent production, right, where people were talking about, there was a lot of, again, the romanticization of like, Dakota Crescent, the history and the heritage of that. And yet for the residents of Dakota Crescent itself, there were very real maintenance problems with the estate. And I think that for me has always been the beauty of Drama Box's work, the tension between wanting to really pay attention to what is there and the beauty and the hope, and at the same time recognizing that there are gaps, there are slippages, there are imperfections, and what does it mean to be able to hold both of these without necessarily being like, one is bad, like not having a value judgment, but really just kind of embracing that and recognizing that this is what leads to the richness of, again, the ecosystem that you're talking about, right? That you need both of these aspects and everything in between to make up this healthy, thriving, alive kind of space of the modern world. So thank you very much for the very generous sharing. I'm really excited to experience for myself, the sound work and also the performances. And I hope that, for the audience who comes, that they also get a very strong sense of the possible futures that could emerge for themselves, not just for Ubin, but for themselves and the communities and mini worlds around them in their own lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kok Heng.